Recording. So do you want me to try and get in?
So you should have gotten a notification, but the meeting will be recorded just so everybody knows. And before we get started, I want to say that we have two moderators today, Mitchell Herman and Kevin Hong. If you have any tech questions, feel free to private message them if like the sound or there's glitching or anything like that. And yes, they'll be available throughout the program. So hi, thank you so much for being here today, despite how busy everybody's lives are right now. My name is Alexandra Thomas, and I'm a third-year PhD student in History of Art and African American Studies with a certificate in Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies. My research is mostly on African and African diaspora, contemporary art, performance, with an emphasis on Black feminism and queer of color critique.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Isabella Robbins. Allie and I worked on creating this event together. So I just want to say welcome and introduce myself. I'm a second-year PhD student and Dinesh Scholar in the History of Art department. I study global contemporary Indigenous art in North America and Australia. I specifically look at site specificity, art making, display, and materiality in and of rural areas. Yeah, so before we begin, of course, we want to start with a land acknowledgement. And I would just like to say that Yale University acknowledges that Indigenous peoples and nations, including Mohegan, Mashantucket, Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Schaghticoke, Golden Hill Pagosset, Niantic, and the Quinnipiac and other Algonquin-speaking peoples had stewarded through generations the lands and waterways of what is now the state of Connecticut. We honor and respect the enduring relationship that exists between these peoples and nations in this land. While that is Yale's official land acknowledgement statement, I also want to point out that it's especially important to remember that settler colonialism is a structure and not an event, and that land acknowledgements are only a small part of honoring Native peoples. For those of you who are not in New Haven or Connecticut, I encourage you to look up whose land you're on. On that note, it's also vitally important that we remember the labor and lives of those enslaved Africans whom this university and this country is built on. May we honor their memories, and may we continue to work towards reparations for Black, Indigenous, and Afro-Indigenous peoples. As a start, I'll be dropping a link in the chat, which includes a list of different Black and Indigenous organizations and individuals that you can support in the Northeastern United States, but also in Canada.
This event arises from me and Isabella's loving friendship as Black and Indigenous scholar sisters. Lots of long talks over the past couple years about Indigenous feminisms, Black feminisms, and global contemporary art. The cultural, political, and aesthetic act of braiding as a formal gesture that unites the performances by these artists is the reason we're convening today. It also becomes a metaphor for the entangled histories of anti-Blackness and settler colonialism. We are committed to weaving solidarity and resistance together as opposed to falling into the divide and conquer tactics that white supremacy and the settler colonial state employ.
In the words of Murray Aboriginal Australian artist and activist Lila Watson, "If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together." There are various levels of collaboration and togetherness here. Me and Allie's creative labor that went into planning this event with support from fellow art history PhD students, and specifically the Modern and Contemporary Art Forum organizers, myself and Allie, but also Mitchell Herman and Kevin Hong, particularly in securing our funding, as well as the History of Art department at large. Additionally, we want to extend a gracious thank you to the Yale Group for the Study of Native America, specifically Professor Ned Blackhawk, and the Yale Graduate Senate Diversity and Inclusion Committee for supporting the funding of this event today. Finally, and most important, there is the collaboration and aesthetic innovation using ancestral modes from Jeneen, Tsēmā, and Tamar and Isaac.
Okay, so now to the introductions. Tamar Clarke-Brown is a London-based artist, writer, and curator. Her interdisciplinary work is focused on experimental futurisms, intimate choreographies, and diasporic practices. She holds an MFA in curating from Goldsmiths. And Isaac Kariuki is a visual artist and writer living between Nairobi and London. His work centers on surveillance, borders, internet culture, and the Black market in relation to the Global South. He holds an MA in digital art from Central St. Martin's.
Jeneen, Frei, Njootli and Njootli and Igharas are both members of the Rematriate Collective, which is an online visual arts and decolonization movement focusing on media representations of Indigenous women. Jeneen, Frei, Njootli is an interdisciplinary Vuntut Gwich'in artist who works primarily with sound and textiles. Her MFA is from the University of British Columbia. Tsēmā Igharas is a Tahltan First Nation artist based in Vancouver. She uses potlatch methods in her artwork that challenges colonial systems of value. She holds an interdisciplinary master's degree from the Ontario College of Art and Design.
Okay, so now we'll turn it over to you, Tamar and Isaac, followed by Tsēmā and Jeneen.
Great, thanks so much. I think Isaac is gonna put some slides up, share his screen, and we'll start talking. CBT is me and Isaac. We began it in 2017, and it's a project that combines the technologies of coding and braiding. Past presentations we've done have included at Cadiz Foundation Paris, at Afrotech Festival in 2018, which is who actually gave us the startup funding for the project, Protein Studios, Tate Galleries, and Cobb Gallery. This is our little logo for the project, and also our Instagrams if you want to follow us. So we're going to play this. If we're going to play this first clip, which is so this is from our last live performance of CBT in November 2019 at Tate Modern, and it was shown in the context, if we just go back to the last one, it was shown in the context of the Annie Albers Tate Late. Normally CBT manifests as a performance installation. They normally last around half an hour, and we basically call them encryption sessions, which we'll get into a little bit later. Normally it's around 3 performers, and we, depending on the event, we kind of do a number of encryption sessions. We do a number of half-an-hour stints. It is kind of a durational performance, which we'll talk a little bit about later. So it's half kind of just because we want to make sure that people's fingers don't get people's fingers don't hurt, but it's also kind of a commentary on, I guess, a long history and a long history of braiding. So just to tell you a little bit about the project. CBT is a kind of speculative reimagining of hair braiding as an emancipatory technology. It concerns issues of surveillance, privacy, and intimate choreographies. So in this network salon that you're seeing, each strand of hair that is woven signals information passing, the encryption and decryption of private messages. Digital networks are communication zones, spaces to share knowledge and resources and to create new material realities, whilst hair braiding is part of a historical and cultural tradition that has spread throughout the African diaspora and beyond and beyond. And just to give you the project credits, CBT is me and Isaac. And the music that you heard a little bit of just now is developed between me and an artist called Sinuosity. And it contains a mix of samples from ASMR hair braiding sessions, samples that I collected from Jamaica, and some music from an artist called Object Blue. The performers, we kind of normally have 3 performers, like I said. The main one, or the main hairdresser, is someone called Toby Adebayo, who is a hairdresser by practice as well. And we developed the project along with a developer called Daniel Stickar at Makerversity, Somerset House Studios in London. We can go to the next slide. So just to give you a little bit of history about braiding and encryption. During research for the project, we stumbled across the case of someone called Benkos Bioho, who some of you might know. He was said to be either born in Angola or Congo, where he was a king, until he was later taken by the Portuguese, Pedro Gomes Reynal, and sold at a market in a country that is now known as Colombia. When he managed to escape, he founded San Basilio de Palenque, which is a small village populated by runaway slaves or enslaved people. He did so with the help of enslaved females who would map out potential routes, escape routes, onto their braided hair, carving out paths with their cornrows. Some patterns were even utilised to deliver secret messages. And we asked ourselves, could this be the first instance of biotechnology or bioencryption? Get the next slide. And this historical example highlighted for us the way that braiding is not only about bringing parts together as kind of the 3-part braid comes together, but in terms of human geography as well. It shows how it brings people together, opens up pathways, and how braiding could be seen as an emancipatory technology. As much as anything, the project is a mediation on the practice of hair braiding, understood as this kind of intimate and constructive technology. This is a video that forms part of the installation, our latest installation made by Isaac. For us, CBT is a speculative proposition for self-care and security in the digital age. The jumping off point was kind of this notion of like protective styling, and it imagines a biometric technology used for escape, not for the marketing of the black subject as a commodity. So biometric identifiers used to enable and not to disable. It offers a reversal of ontological insecurity produced by the digitizing biometric processes. And that the phrase ontological insecurity is a phrase from one of our kind of key nodes, I suppose, in the project, a scholar, an amazing scholar called Simone Brown. So we use the recognition of hair as a biometric identifier in this project. Isaac's now going to talk a little bit about the practicalities of the project, how it works.
Yeah, so basically we developed a software that kind of isolates and tracks specific hand movements. So what you're seeing now, it's a thing called the Microsoft Kinect, which was a kind of outdated video game similar to like the Nintendo Wii, where it just tracks your hand movement. So it knows, so here it shows like right hand is green, left hand is blue. And so we use that technology and kind of decided how we can make the movement of hand motion when you're braiding to be a kind of code. So you start at like at an axis point, and like if you move up this many degrees or whatever, you get 45, and if you move this, you know, so it'll all be numbers that can be encrypted and essentially become messages. So in the performance, what we were doing is that the braiders were sending messages to each other by the patterns they were making with the Kinect software. And so the hand movement kind of becomes its own kind of form of language and technology. So CBT is actually an art project kind of masquerading as a tech firm or like a tech startup. We have a logo, t-shirts, we talk in like tech speak, we use words like incubator and disruption. Kind of as a way of like communicating to the audience that we are a heavily branded firm that has really ambiguous ambitions and ambiguous motives, and that can be sometimes societally dangerous, but you make that trade-off to slow down like whatever social anxiety that you kind of have and we are here to rescue you from that, and you give up basically your data in exchange for that safety. And that's seen time and time again continuously with kind of like ovulation apps or hard medicine apps and things that are for your health, but actually they sell off your data to data brokers. And so that's just like one way of your selfhood to be exploited. From like basically the moment that you step outside, you are captured by technology laced around your city, from traffic lights to CCTV cameras to ATM machines, using the bus, using the tube, using the train, all these things are ways of mapping your movement. But that's not really even that necessary, because when your phone is trying to pick up a different cell tower as you move, that's basically tracking your movement, so that you don't even need all those other ones. Just you in possession of a cell phone can create a narrative around how your day goes. And we don't know where that technology goes, or like where that data goes, and it's very ambiguous to the audience. And I'm actually gonna show a video of Donald Rumsfeld, which I love, and it kind of encapsulates everything. I hope you can hear it. Oh.
Reports that say that something hasn't happened are always interesting to me, because as we know, there are known knowns. There are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know.
I mean, it can sound like gibberish, but what he was saying can also be implied with kind of technology, in that if you walk into a shop and you see a CCTV camera, what you know is that it's recording you, but what you don't know is where it's going. Or you don't even know if it's recording you. It could be a prop, because a lot of shops can't afford to constantly have something recording. So you don't know that you're being tracked, and you don't know where that information is going. So it's a whole thing of known unknowns, and you know you're being watched, but you don't know for what reason. And it creates this loop in your mind that you're constantly being surveyed. And within that, you modulate your behavior and the way you just move around the world. It's because you're essentially, you think you're always constantly being tracked, even when you're not. But at this current moment, because of things like WikiLeaks, Snowden, Cambridge Analytica, things of that nature, everyone has become accustomed to understanding things to do with surveillance and your data being stolen. But what's been interesting in the last decade, I'd say, there's been a bigger awareness of facial recognition. Like, that's kind of become more interesting to people. And I think it has to do with the fact that it's your face and it's a visual thing, and everyone has a different face. Like, you can't really anonymize a face. Like, your face is your face. And so facial recognition has become like a bigger thing than like data and like code and things like that. Like, people are more scared of that. And what's also been kind of interesting is that the response has been people wanting better tools of facial recognition. Like, for instance, in this video, HP computers are racist. It's basically two employees, one is white, one is black. He's saying it doesn't detect him and it detects her. There's been so many instances of that, of like a camera not recognizing like an East Asian person. And down below, you can see like a Zoom lecturer. He doesn't have, his head is like cut off. But a lot of people have responded by saying, no, we should actually improve facial recognition. But that's actually that's essentially saying we need to enforce this more and like improve the technology of surveillance rather than abolishing it completely. We want to reform it. And that's kind of goes into a very strange place. Whereas obviously like the Zoom lecturer and bottom left, which is someone trying to get an ID and it's saying his mouth is open, like things like that obviously need improvement. But we can't, wanting improvement from like HP computers and private firms, that's actually counterintuitive to our own safety, basically. Over here, I kind of wanted to touch on two things. The first one is on the left, from a Guardian article from 2015. It says asylum seeker is made to wear colored wristbands in Cardiff. So this is kind of the racial elements going deeper, where Cameroonian asylum seekers in Cardiff are made to wear red wristbands to access basic amenities like food and shelter and clothing. They obviously said that they felt dehumanized and they felt like they were not people and they're not part of society. And this is essentially imprisoning people out in the open, where you don't need to even shackle them. They just need to be out in the open wearing red wristbands, and that changes their behavior. And on the right is another story from last year about basically drill music, rap music and grime in the UK being used by prosecutors the lyrics essentially being used against people in order to like prosecute them for gang violence or gang activity. And then that's essentially using music as a surveying music and looking at people's musical records as a way of trying to survey them and criminalize them. But what I also find interesting is that this is only ever used with rap music or Black music, I'd say. And it's kind of because Black people are kind of they're not awarded like artistry, or they're not awarded the idea that they can be people who are interested in fiction, that everything is autobiographical, everything they do is in earnest. So if you rap about gang activity, that means you did it yesterday. And that's, whereas probably with a white musician, that's not going to be true. And there's a privilege to that. And so the next section, kind of finishing off this part, is more lighthearted, but a bit touching on that as well. The branding strategy company called K-Hole, they made up a term called stealth mode. And you can see this is the operation of modulating your visibility to the world. Often this is a luxury good of being able to turn off, e.g. using your phone, a flip phone, and making others sign NDAs, wearing sunglasses, etc. And this is a way of abstraction and a way of kind of hiding yourself in plain sight. Like obviously, you can escape surveillance by wealth. You can obviously have assistants to like do everything for you and never leave the house. And you can have an insane wardrobe that kind of hides your visibility and hides all kinds of ways you operate and move around the world. So there's obviously ways of removing yourself from these structures that seem kind of impossible. Yeah, that's it for now. I think Tamar is going to continue on the next section.
Sorry, unmute myself. Can we play the video, Isaac? So this is some footage of live collected running code from a CBT performance. And I think you can see here quite easily this idea of like the build-up of work, the build-up of labor. We were interested in this idea of code as architecture. And in the same way, we kind of got very interested in this idea that the binary code, the way that braiding itself is this 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 versus the binary coding of zeros and ones that builds digital environments, digital spaces. We were really interested kind of linking into this idea of stealth mode, like what are the spaces, what are the possibilities for invisibility or even for just going about your daily life in an age that is so surveilled, that is so, when you are so intimately surveilled. So we kind of started looking at things like, with braiding, we realized that this is kind of different sort of, it's a mundane space in a sense, but it's also like a very magical place. And it seems like a space that was perhaps like ripe for, I guess, that's sort of why we decided to look into it and to think, actually, what are all the kind of things that you do anyway? Like, where are the spaces that people don't necessarily suspect you in that sense? And in the 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 of the coding, this video is, as Isaac explained, the way that the installation works. Essentially, this is it collecting all the different locational media that goes on during a performance. So it collects all of the coordinates and it runs alongside. We've collected all of these for every performance in a kind of archive that we have ongoing. And we realized that we wanted to look into this idea of braiding as protective styling and as kind of micro formulations of resistance. We were really fascinated by the kind of choreography and like the zen of it all, this idea perhaps of like a slowed down or ritual approach to revolution, in the way that it builds up, in the way that you could do so much with it, in the way that I hope seeing these kind of two images next to each other, this video and this image, you kind of see the sort of different, the way that we're sort of thinking about it as architecture. And there were lots of different questions that came up, I suppose, ideas of sort of healing and self-care, like how do you counter the burnout factor of radical action and people engaged in the work? You know, I mean, I think we were just kind of thinking about this, and the times that I am just, this is actually a video of me in the hairdresser getting my hair braided. But there is something insane about the ritual revolution of it all, and the way that you do feel so You know, you have your hair braiding, you get up, you shake your head, you kind of release yourself from the crick in a sense. It is the space that I think different people that we've been inspired along the way sort of talk to as well. You know, Martine Sims in her Mundane Afrofuturist manifesto. There's a book by an author called Kevin Kwashi who talks about something called the sovereignty of quiet. And there's a filmmaker called Cecil Emeke who has this amazing series called Strolling, where it's just Black people walking along, having really critical conversations with each other, but in these really sort of, all they're doing is walking together. All these kind of spaces that are just very unobserved, I suppose, or unsuspected. And there's also this sense of kind of meditation and repetition, and how you kind of build new habits through repetition. I think part of the practice of art in general is to kind of give that breathing space, and to give space to something to kind of elongate and shift the time that something's looked at or considered. And I think there's so much potential in looking at braiding as a space of kind of not only language itself, but patterning, the idea of culture and pattern recognition, the way that language and culture are instituted. So the title of, if we go back one slide, one more time. Yeah, so, oh no, next one. Thank you. So the title of the full work is actually CBT pull requests. And pull requests is actually a term from GitHub, which is a collaborative software development platform, which hosts open source projects and private repositories. So you can host and review code, manage projects, and build software alongside other developers. And the term pull requests refers to this act of requesting to collaborate on someone's existing code that they've uploaded and made available on the platform. And it reminded me of the way that when your hairdresser would quickly sort of part finish all the plaits she was doing for you, and then ask someone else to just finish them off for her, which is such a simple act, but also kind of a perfect metaphor as a whole in terms of the wider potentialities of a model such as CBT, talking about collaborative building, asking someone to collaborate on the code. And these are just some footage from our, which one was this, Afrotech. The middle one is some completed braids. The two on the sides are just two parts from the performance. So in each performance, each braider would have normally 3 sessions. So each braider would continue the braid of another braider, and just continue braiding. And it was quite fascinating just to see how much, not even just the braiders and the performers that were involved in the performance, were changed and sort of so invested and so calm with the process. But I think we were both always really surprised that people would actually watch the whole thing. They'd watch the whole performance. Audience would sit down and get very invested in just watching this sort of ritual performance play out. And the next image is just a kind of behind the scenes from our last tape performance. Can you put the sound on? Is it off? This is a little bit of footage I captured after Arkadie's performance, which was actually the curator just having a dance after everything was done. But I just really love this video and I wanted to share it with you. We have some practical kind of recommendations and stuff for different ways to kind of increase your security if you're worried about cybersecurity, all these kind of things, but we can do that in the questions later. And just to say thanks for giving us space and looking forward to the next presentation.
Yeah, thank you.
That's us done.
Thanks so much, Tamar. Tsēmā and Jeneen, are y'all ready? Cool.
Braiding, weaving, sisterhood, flagging tape, moccasins, Twindian, navigating the bush, tangled hair, resource extraction, skip. What does it mean to add these pieces into ourselves? Red, orange, stripes, pink, blue, warning. fluorescent hair wrapping around northern bodies, bound by landscape, immemorial roots, blood memory dissolves after long, almost silent, subtle sounds of zips between fingertips is broken by laughter. Hunting knife cuts and pulls knowledge through our bodies.
So Sinuosity is an ongoing performance by Jeneen, Frei, and Njootli, and myself, Tsēmā, Igharas. So we came together having gone to school and being longtime friends. I personally am coming from northern British Columbia, or what is now known as British Columbia, from the Tahltan Nation. So Njootli and Igharas, good morning. It's morning over here. And I'm an interdisciplinary artist, mainly working with connecting materials to mine sites and bodies to the land. And I'll turn it over to Jeneen to talk a little bit more about how we came together.
Vangwinzi or Vangwinzi, morning here too. Vangwinzi, Shori, Jeneen, Frei, Njootli, Vajri. My name's Jeneen, Frei, Njootli. I'm a member of the Vantad Gwich'in peoples, and my home community is in northern Yukon, in Old Crow, Yukon. I wasn't raised in my home community. I was born in Whitehorse, Yukon, and grew up moving around quite a bit. And for us, part of our protocols is who's your mom, where are you from? And I want to acknowledge my mom, Sybil Frei, and Louise Rebel Frei. And I'd also like to acknowledge my dad, Stanley Njootli, and my grandmothers, Joanne Njootli, Betty Fleming, and Ellen Frei. And for us, the Gwich'in we're a bordered people. So we have a relationship on both sides of the colonial border, and my nation and Thema's nation have had a long-standing relationship with each other, and it feels really empowering, and like we're continuing those kinship systems in this work that we're doing together. And as Thema said, we've been longtime friends, and Thema was doing this work called Ore Body, and was doing works with braiding flagging tape. And I had been doing works where I made these long wigs with like 14-foot braids, but braiding in different fabrics into them. And then we wanted to find ways of merging our practices together, both working in performance, and then we also get mistaken for each other all the time. And I find it really endearing, but it also maybe is reflecting something else about people's conception of Indigenous femme presenting folks. And for a while we both had the same, we also had the same haircut, but so we were thinking about this like Twindian, this idea of like the Twindian. And we were in a residency together at the Banff Center in 2015, and we worked on, it was the first time that we created Sinuosity, and it resulted in a 5-hour performance of us braiding flagging tape into each other's hair. And the work has gotten to take place across many territories since then, and most recently as part of the Toronto Biennial. And in the different times that we've made this work, it's unusual for myself to first of all have images of my body performing to serve as documentation of the work. And that was part of negotiating collaboration for me, is like you get to create something that wouldn't be possible if it weren't just for yourself. And like Thema's practice is so Tsēmā, you're so brilliant. I'm so like excited to get to work with you and like be in kinship together. Since the start of this project, you know, it's taken different forms, and Tsēmā had I don't know if you want to speak a bit about our camo jumpsuits, or if you I'll pass it to you and would love to jump in again after.
Sure. And I just want to acknowledge too that there's just so much more that was possible with this performance coming together, and how much I acknowledge Jeneen's practice as well. Just want to put that out there. So when we first come together, it was a real natural evolution of our works, you know, like Jeneen was saying, and we agreed to meet at this Banff residency and explore it further. We also did a video of the work, did it as a documentation. We showed that in North Carolina as part of the work. So it's taken a few different ways of presenting. I guess what is exciting about this work is how it's grown, but also we're speaking about it in a negotiation. So whenever we're coming together, we are negotiating. We're also getting a little bit better at braiding. So in the Toronto Biennale, that performance was 3 hours, or was it even less, Jean? I think it might have even been 2 hours. You know, we warned the curators, we're like, are people gonna be spending this much time with us? And same in Mexico, we performed for Encuentro, put on by the Hemispheric Institute for Performance and Politics, run out of NYU. And so we were in Mexico City where this photo here was taken. And for this iteration, because Encuentro was speaking about noise and sound and really putting yourself out there, we decided we wanted to incorporate microphones, and we wanted to really put on a production so that we could have this traveling performance. So we had made these real camo jumpsuits. It was a project that I had started a few years ago, really wanting a uniform. So I'm wearing one of them now. Really wanting a uniform to be able to wear that was practical and stylish and fit other than the man's body. So I started to work on these, and Jeneen and I, we lived in the same apartment, and so I'd been showing her these, and we would sew together or be sharing in our little sewing group. And you know, I pitched, hey, let's do this together. You know, you'll choose a pattern from your territory, I'll choose one from mine, and let's make these jumpsuits together. We brought these we made little backpacks and utility belts. And so when we got to Mexico and we come to perform, other than the sound being totally messed up, we were able to kind of undo the backpack and be ready to go. So this was really, really exciting to prepare for this one. So with the sound, you know, it was a little bit of a miss because we wanted to put contact mics on our hands, and then we wanted to project this sound of what the flagging tape in our hair sounds like, which we found, because we extracted the sound from one of the videos, also sounds like water. And so we wanted to play a little bit with that concept. In the end, because that digital sound didn't work, we really amplified our own voices. So singing, in Tahltan, we have an honor song. So singing that honor song, Jeneen really raising her voice, and in the first performance coming up with this, I'm not sure exactly where it came up, you know, from her gut, coming up with this song that we start then in the remixing, so trying to apply for certain grants. We had brought this video together, and then I started to loop that song that Jeneen come up with, and so we started to do that live in the performance. And so, you know, in some ways the sound not working was a real disappointment, but in other ways it really brought us out to do that analog looping. Yeah, and then I guess it really just started to build up and build up our confidence. I would say that before this performance, I was not as interested. Strengthened my confidence and kind of brought me out to be able to sing in public. So I don't know if you want to talk about our last iteration, Jeneen, just
Sure.
About Toronto.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, also wanting to say thank you to the organizers and the other presenters, and for including our voices in this. It feels, yeah, just being in appreciation of being able to speak together like this. And for, you know, both of our communities have relationship to resource extraction. It's something that is a huge part of the colonial project of ongoing displacement and genocide of Indigenous peoples. And the flagging tape is a part of that language, but it's also something that is used by our communities for our own trail marking, for our own traditional land use plans. And it's something that marks our territories when we're in negotiation for our land use, and trying and being able to navigate the land safely. So it occupies these different places for us, and working with the flagging tape as a signifier and wondering, what does it mean to braid this signifier of both intimacy and exercising our sovereignty on our traditional territories, but also thinking about the use and implication of flagging tape and that signaling for resource extraction in our lands, and what does it mean to braid this plastic material into our bodies, and taking into consideration stereotypes of Indigenous femmes and of Indigenous folks with braiding, and wanting to be able to play with that. And we would do these performances where we braid our hair together, and then just spend some time being with that connection together. And then eventually we invite people to skip through our hair as this way of having that playfulness and that joy, and also thinking about the presence of the song that has also grown and shifted and unfolded as this performance has taken place in different territories, and that also wanting to acknowledge the work of Cheryl Lirondelle and Ursula Johnson, and thinking about the call response project that was created by Tara Hogue and Maria Hopfield, and many other organizers came together to bring that into fruition, also across territories, but that idea of the call and response. And the song is one that I composed, and it's a mourning song, like a song for mourning. And in the end, after folks skip through our hair, we liberate ourselves with a hunting knife. And it can maybe seem a bit jarring for this knife to be brought out, and then we cut each other's hair, and then that hair becomes we're trying to think through what this will look like, because the performance when we were checking in yesterday, we both agreed that it feels like it's, we've done this performance for 5 years, and that it's time for it to look like something else now. and how can we show representation of the song, of the sounds of the zipping of the flagging tape through our fingertips, through that rhythm of the flagging tapes hitting the ground as we begin to bring them into motion, which is a nice way to kind of like wake them up after we've been in this still, slow process of braiding ourselves into each other. And with the braids, we've each kept them now. And so we have this, like, these piles of braids from our performances, and how can we find a way that these braids can hold the space of that accumulation of gestures. And for the performance in Toronto, we both had, we were able to have a bit more time with, we were able to spend a bit more time focusing on tech, and we had our contact mics that were taped onto the palms of our hands. And so we took turns. It amplified those zips, and it was playing through a loop pedal, and that was building in the space. And we also took turns singing into each other's hair, which was then also amplified and looped, and felt like this generous gesture of like giving that care and intimacy into this thing that's becoming an extension of the other's body. But yeah, wanting to acknowledge too the copper mine, Tsēmā, in your territory, and wanting to acknowledge the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge and Trump's plan to open it up for resource extraction. It's also, for us, it's Ijik Watsat Gwandai Gutlit, the sacred place where life begins. And that's where the porcupine caribou herds calving grounds are. And our elders have said that if the caribou die, we die. And if their calving grounds are opened up for oil and gas resource extraction, Trump's planning on moving forward with seismic testing, and that's going to have an irreparable effect on the caribou and our people, right? So as we've been doing this work of braiding and of working with flagging tape and the signifier, there's these other ripples that are happening in our territories and in our communities.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in too, is, a big reason that I use flagging tape in my practice is that signifier of industry. So trying to point the viewer into this way that we were, for this project anyways, braided together with this industry at this point. My ancestors mining traditionally obsidian and copper, and then thinking about how that mining has been perverted through a colonial extraction process. But then today, many of my relatives are working in the mines, for the mines, affected by the mines. And so thinking, I guess literally or figuratively, how we are braided or woven in to these issues. But yes, it's, I think what makes this work exciting for me is the beauty that's come from this concept that could be very horrible, or trying to figure out how to talk through these things together. Jeneen and I speaking about these different issues in our territories, they seem like these parallel worlds, but we're fighting different fights at the same time. And so just figuring out how to come together and be stronger through our kinship. And I think that's it for us.
Well, thank you so much to all four of you for sharing a background on these works with us. I'm personally feeling very moved right now. The way that fugitivity and abstraction and decolonization and freedom and haptic intimacy, affective intimacy is at play in both of these works, these performance works, is really powerful. I also know that I personally, I very much miss the communal space of the braiding hair salons during COVID. Well, during this, one of my friends just sent me a picture of our other friend braiding my hair, and it just made me realize how much I miss that and how this event feels like a good way for all of us to process our current moment and also start thinking about ways to weave resistance and ways to process together. So in light of that, I'm hoping that before we take a few questions from the audience, we can let you guys respond to each other, how you're feeling, because to be clear for everybody who might have come on late, this is a pairing that Isabella and I made after what has been a really important and transformative friendship for us in thinking about how we can think through Blackness and indigeneity in art. So this is our pairing. So we realize we're putting you on the spot with this. This is part of this thought experiment here, is having you guys respond to each other. So I want to make space for that first.
I was going to just want to make a comment that I think it's this notion of kinship, but in speaking about a sort of, I guess, extractive technology, extractive industries, it's very, of course, me and Isaac are kind of coming at it from the sort of digital culture side, but it's really important to remember that all of these technologies that we're developing, you know, silver, that was the advent of photography, was mine, you know, that is mined. Now we are working with different sort of digital industries that are mining different minerals, different things that we're using to create the things, to create visibility or to build our world. But it's also this notion that we are all in this kind of shared, you know, we all have a shared earth. Actually, we're mining the earth. We're all mining the earth. And I think that togetherness, that it's important to sort of recognize that whatever everyone is doing, we are all implicated and all, you know, share the same world essentially.
Yeah.
And that really came out in your performance, in your work. So I thought it was really powerful.
Yeah, and also after the technology is extracted, it degrades, and after it's degraded, it ends up in landfills, and that is on indigenous land, or it's like taken overseas to like developing countries to be dumped there and like end up in like a landmine or like a fire. And that's also really important. And I'm happy like resource extraction just came out of this conversation, and I'm glad that we found a through line in all of this. Weird diversion, but I kind of wanted to ask, I think it was Jeneen who said you guys invited the audience to kind of jump rope and skip rope on the braided on the braid. And I was wondering, because we have been inviting the audience to like, you know, come take a peek at the GoPro cameras that the girls have on their heads and like look at what they're looking at. But then I think like after 4 or 5 exhibitions, we kind of felt that it was a bit, not like fetishizing, but it was a bit like we put them like in a carnival or like some like circus, and we're telling the audience like, come look at this spectacle. And I wonder if that was ever thought that ever crossed you guys' mind.
Can I jump in, Tsēmā?
Yeah, totally.
Oh no, I'm like, was that a dad pun? Sorry.
So good.
I mean, it's something that, I mean, I'm no longer part of the Remitri Collective, but I so love and respect and appreciate them. But that's something that we considered a lot in the collective, and that I think about in my practice. And I think that as an Indigenous artist, we're confronted with how we're tangled up in that spectacle of history all the time. And that Dana Claxton talks about how Indigenous folks are functioning under 5 layers of gaze, and that there's, she talks about that in a publication from 2015 at the Surrey Art Gallery, and that and then Paul Chatt-Smith talks about Indigenous relationships to photography. And for a long time, I didn't feel like I could, working in Vancouver under the hegemony of how like photo conceptualism has lived here specifically, I didn't feel comfortable saying that I was interested in photography, but I'm so skeptical of images and how images live and have autonomy, and then also being wary of what narratives we've been placed into and how we haven't had sovereignty over our images. And so in this joint performance, in that idea of skipping and bringing people through, it's also thinking about how do we pull knowledge through our bodies, and how do we bring that concept of, how do we also showcase and make space for Indigenous joy, and to have space for and to maybe, like, it's also a way of honoring the audiences who've sat with us for hours, right, to be able to just like wake up and play together a little bit. But I so appreciated that in your collaboration, that idea of like rupturing that gaze, or giving the performers that sense that, for me, it felt like they had a sense of sovereignty and more agency, both as people who are being viewed but are also viewing and recording, and that maybe it's asking people to behave differently in that space.
Definitely. It's so each of the performers has a GoPro on their head, that we kind of wanted to create this sort of almost like this small intimate space where they're sort of like, it's almost like a CCTV circuit of themselves almost. So they each have kind of got a device as they're braiding that they can also watch the other braiders braiding and watch things in close up, some of which are also projected in the space. But it was kind of, really important for us to kind of, I guess, rupture, like you're saying, this idea of the gaze, and be like, you know, who is looking at the image, who's creating the images, who is creating the footage, who's creating the media, who's creating the programming, all these kind of questions that we wanted to sort of like invert it, and I suppose, turn that on its head.
And I think we also had another GoPro like on the ceiling that was from bird's eye view, and I think inundating the audience with just so many ways to look at what's going on was, I guess, a different way of how you view an exhibition, and how you kind of, I don't know, like, we couldn't obviously make it haptic and like let them touch the stuff, even though that's like a different way of appreciating art. But like all the different viewpoints, and like the fact that the models were in control also of how they were being viewed, made it a different experience outside of all other kind of performances where it can become a spectacle, whether you like it or not, especially, the kind of people represented on stage. So, we just had to be very vigilant about that, I think.
I guess also like working with Toby, who is a hairdresser, and, you know, making sure that they had, you know, we kind of collaborated on like the designs and how we wanted to do things. So it was very much not about taking someone and saying, you're going to perform this role. It was very much kind of like who is in the vicinity, who is in the community, who is actually doing that, who is performing that service almost for people anyway, who is kind of, how can we collaborate with you on this in an honest way? I'm curious about the flagging tape and the lengths, because I think in both performances you go for a lot longer than we do. But this kind of idea of almost like the surreal length of the braids and the building, and, you know, the seeing the labour, but also seeing these braids grow was really important for us, and even just in kind of like a surrealist sense. But I'm curious firstly, how long the braids got in your performances, and secondly, whether or not you know how long the distance was in terms of maybe in terms of like territory or land, or if in the end it, you know, the amount of time or the amount of lengths that you braided is now equal to the area of, I don't know, your street, or I don't know. I'm curious in how that kind of ties into sort of geography.
Sure. You notice I might get kicked off a few times here. I'm not sure. I think my internet's a bit unstable, but I can chime in and hopefully I don't get kicked off. When we first decided on this performance, it was a little bit of, it was a bit more practical, the length of the braid. So the space that we had to record, the lens angle, how much could it capture, and then we needed it to be long enough that we could double Dutch somebody in, do some skipping, and make sure that it would go over, you know, like somebody who was maybe 6 foot tall. And like we mentioned, it was a bit of a struggle in time. And then when we proposed to do this project again in a couple of other situations, you know, warning the curators that this is pretty intense, that people can also kind of come in and out. The length started to become very organic, and we got faster, like we were saying. So another thing that we started to think about, especially coming out in Mexico, is we talked about being in each other's pocket. So in music, starting to feel each other's rhythms. And for us, this is all about that. I mean, whether it be how we start to sing together, or when we know to start the next braid, it really is a look, a glance, a feeling, and then we know to start the next braid. Or we have a loose choreography too of what kind of performance gestures that we're going to do in the end, and what looks really good, and what makes for like a moment to really be involved as a viewer, and then in the end looking for that moment, or instinctually knowing what would be a good time to how to invite the viewer in. Because this is a struggle in performance for sure, is how to have the viewer cross the line into becoming part of your performance. And so thankfully with the skipping, it's a little bit more natural, because you have this idea since you were a kid, you know, that this means, you know, like starting to skip the rope, and starting to call is asking for a gesture. For the first couple of performances, we didn't really make a plant. But then after a little while, we asked a couple of people, can you initiate? And the kind of beautiful thing about that is we didn't even really need the plants. So to sort of answer your question about how the length is determined, you know, at first it was organic, and then we just knew.
I want to ask something which I haven't even like fully developed it in my head, but basically I'm thinking the two shared things about our projects, I think, are like a sense of autonomy or a sense of control, and how you perceive yourself and how you want to kind of project yourself. And then I also started to think about like what else like indigenous groups and Black communities kind of have in common. And I was thinking about during the uprising of like this summer with like upending of like racial order, and how there was not just riots, but there was also like toppling of like colonial monuments in the UK, and also like in the so-called America and so-called like Canada. And I was wondering like what else can also be shared that's like a bit like automatic in that sense, where it wasn't even a thought out plan, like it just happened to coincide together, if that makes any sense. Like is there anything else that can happen that feels natural in terms of like material kind of resistance? Does that make any sense? I don't know.
Can I maybe reflect back some of what I'm hearing?
Sure.
Yeah, just thinking about, okay, so I heard material resistance, sovereignty, that upending, and then thinking about how, yeah, we can like support and be in solidarity of each other, and like what is that material potentiality maybe?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
And thinking about, and you two touched on this in your presentation too, but like what is that like, thinking about the lineage of the braid, and thinking about the how that kind of maybe gives us a roadmap forward. And I wanted to acknowledge this piece by Frei Heavyshield and Shelley Nero. I'm gonna do something about it to show you my phone screen. But it's I guess I can screen share in a minute, but it's this piece by Frei, Heavy Shield, and Shelley Nero, and they created it in 1999 at the Banff Center. So in Stoney Nakoda and Blackfoot territory. And what does it mean that this work happened there between these two matriarchs of Indigenous art that happened there in 1999, and then we were doing this work there in 2015, and wanting to acknowledge them too, like what work has happened that has enabled us to do the work that we're able to do now, and then also wanting to acknowledge the work of like Lido Pimenta also has this image of the two joined braids in a recent music video. Suzanne Kite does incredible sound works with these long braids. Rita Heppy, who's an Indigenous artist from Australia, also does works with ropes and braiding. And then it's on runways with Guo Pei. There's many of these instances of this braiding and thinking about how communities exist together. And I'm not sure if that's, I'm not sure if it's an answer, but it might not be the answer, or there's many other.
But I think you're onto something, Jeneen, where you're seeing these images of braids and you are associating them to being a hairstyle of a warrior. And this is something that we had talked about before, is you think about the practicality of having tight braids in versus like a loose hair getting in the way. And I think about that when going to protests. When my hair was long enough, I would braid it, because it really was not only it's not only like an identifying, it's for me how I go into ceremony, it's how I go into protest, and it would be how I go into battle. And so I think, what Isaac is talking about with seeing these performative gestures, these acts with your body, with this current moment of protest, I think that it's really important to see those, like why we have this, the way that we show ourselves or present ourselves. Jeneen and I were talking about how we had our hairstyle a certain way for this long because of the performance. And that this year was the first year, maybe since 2002, since I had short hair, and couldn't totally do that performance, and at this point we had both come to an agreement that the performance for us was finished, and it gave us permission to cut our hair. But I just I just want to acknowledge that for this many years up to this point, it's how I represented myself as Native, especially being of also colonial settler descent. I can present in a few different ways, and so I braid my hair as a symbol.
I think it's really interesting what you're saying about like how a lot of different artists have worked with braiding, and also even from friends that work in fashion or photography, and seeing this kind of almost like a new loop of seeing a lot of images of braiding, Solange, Jacoby Satterwhite, but also, so many amazing photographers and artists are kind of working with this idea of the braid. And I do find it incredible just in terms of like thinking back to, the name of CBT also is the name of a psychosocial treatment, it's cognitive behavioral therapy, and thinking about how you can change the loop or change what you see, change what features in your loop, change what features in your feed, and almost this idea of seeing another person working with the braid as being almost like both, almost like I suppose a mirror image in some sense, but also kind of a sense of shared connection or shared, yes, I see you, you see me, we're continuing in a similar vein or something. I think it's a really powerful thing to kind of see it reflected in so many different ways, and it's almost like such a simple thing, but it's amazing to see what you can do with it.
I'm gonna go ahead and say something. First of all, thank you so much. This is beautiful and amazing, and there's so many comments that I think you all can see, but if it's okay with you guys, can we just take a question or two from the audience? Is everyone okay? I think, yeah, this has been super generative and beautiful. But I did want to ask Jazz's question, because I think it's similar to something I was wondering about, but thinking about braiding as a geographical space is really interesting. And if you can see it, Jazz asks, in the chat, could each group speak to the futurity or temporality more generally of braiding practices? Kariuki and Tamar's discussion seems to lend itself to a conversation on the simultaneity where braiding functions as an unmappable practice or a dance for the hands that are not legible to surveillance practices. It's as if braiding is anticipating future surveillance and has already prepared to resist it while offering intimacy and release from surveillance. Which I think also Jeneen and Tsēmā, just even thinking about kind of the recording practices and your choices to show video or not show video and things like that, I think are super interesting. Yeah, so do you have a question? Or I'd love to hear your answer. I think we'd all love to hear that.
Wants to go first? I'm just going to make a comment on, I think it's really interesting at the moment that a lot of artists are kind of looking into other areas almost. So like I was speaking to an amazing artist called Rashad Newsom recently, who is going to go into the healthcare app sector because he's made this realization that actually the things that he's working on, he works a lot with voguing communities and practices combined with technology and queer communities. And he was kind of like, you know, I want to find out a way to do what I'm doing, but also to help the people that I care most about. And I think it's quite interesting in terms of futurity that artists are kind of seeing how they can lend what they do anyway, and kind of lend that eye to really practically getting involved, I suppose, in helping communities. I don't really answer the question, but I just think it was a comment that I wanted to make, just because I think it's very interesting to see, especially at a time like this when the world is insane, how people are kind of looking at the things that they take notice of, the practices that they kind of engage in, and seeing how that can, I suppose, fan out into the wider world.
I think it's, yeah, maybe we are kind of anticipating like stronger, bigger, like surveillance kind of technology or surveillance tools, and how we're going to resist them. But like, because there's so many like tools already that people are using to hide themselves from surveillance, like the whole, like hiding your webcam with like tape, but then you'll be met with the idea that, well, they can just turn on your audio, so then what? And you're just gonna keep, it's gonna be like a Bugs Bunny kind of chase of like keeping trying to like improve yourself and make yourself like a supermensch kind of figure who like understands surveillance in all its ways and trying to resist it the most. What I'd say, and as a response, is you should maybe practice harm reduction and like understanding your community and kind of enclosing yourself within your community, rather than accepting surveillance as this thing and then trying to work against it. I think you should, I think like harm reduction is a way of harm reduction, and also just understanding your community and being closer to like the real world community is a way of not fully escaping surveillance, because we can't fully, but also just understanding people better and being there for other people when other kind of harmful things are going on. And with that said, from all the research we've done and kind of talking to people who do collect data and like analyze the data, a lot of them say like 90% of it is trash and like it's unusable, and it's kind of a bubble we're in where they haven't figured out that, like advertisers and like big companies haven't figured out yet that it's actually mostly useless, and all the data that they collect of you can't really be created a narrative out of, because it's just, people are just like erratic. People have 20 tabs open. Like it's just hard to analyze someone from that. So yeah, I think, trying to answer the question, I think, you can continue anticipating like totalizing surveillance, but there's also other things to anticipate. And like if you foster communities and you think about harm reduction more, you can shield yourself a lot from it and become more of like a holistic person. I think that's how I would answer that.
I think, can I add to that, just in terms of, I was just thinking about the term like low tech, and I suppose the importance of just as big tech or high tech, that's not really a phrase that I'm going to invest in, but as tech increases and surveillance increases and all these kind of things, I suppose recognizing the importance of materiality, of things that are often classed as low tech, as kind of just investing in things that perhaps give you more than these companies, than these technologies do anyway, right? But just staying critical, I suppose, staying active, and if you can, getting involved, I suppose, in processes so you understand things more, or you have a hand in shaping.
Yeah, and for the most part, I guess braiding is something that's considered low tech. And I think it was the Cyborg Manifesto that kind of talked about how like homemaking is also seen as cyborgian and kind of low tech as well. Like there's so many things I guess you can categorize as low tech, but really they're more meaningful than like, I don't know, creating an app that like delivers pizza in like 1 second. You know? That's my 2 cents.
With that relationship of surveillance, it's our communities have had a long relationship with surveillance and being surveilled, and what that looks like is shifting. Like this is not new. This is not a new dynamic for us, right? And we're going to continue to find ways of like building community in and around and through and with that. And yeah, Isaac, thank you for that. I haven't heard that idea around harm reduction, around being surveilled. And I guess I've seen or like watched tutorials on like how to create like a lockbox for your phone for different actions and how to kind of protect ourselves, which, yeah, but thank you for that language. And I also want to acknowledge that the artists that I mentioned earlier who are thinking about that lineage of braiding is like, it's incomplete and is messy, and I'm like there's so many more artists who are working in that way. And I also wanted to acknowledge the Ubuntu talks that happened in Montreal, as well as Amy Malbuff's work. Missy Elliott in like 2019, last September, had a huge braid that spelled Missy. I was like, so cool to see that. And then Megan Mousseau's practice of braiding too. But it's like, it's ongoing. And yeah, but thinking about surveillance and also like that practice of weaving, or like what knowledge is and stories, right, are held in those belongings that become extensions of our body. And that form of protection. And like Tsēmā brought up like warrior culture, but I also want to bring up warrior culture, because worrying I think is really important labor, and I'm like more of a worrier than I am a warrior. And I just think that that's another important labor too.
Wait, did you say warrior culture or worrying culture?
I said both.
Oh, okay.
Worrying, like anxiety, worrying.
And
Okay. Oh, sorry.
No.
Cool. So I actually think this is a good place to end, and we're quite a bit over, but just if we can all do a virtual round of applause for these wonderful speakers. Yay. Thank you so much. This has been really just gratifying. I'm like texting Allie we're both texting about like how good we feel, and the chats and the comments in the chat are making me feel really happy right now, even though it's snowing and it's only October here. But yeah, so thank you so much, Tamar, Isaac, Jeneen, Tsēmā, Allie, Mitchell, Kevin, and all the people who helped us organize this event. This has just been really beautiful, and I keep seeing comments about how we need to make this happen, the collaboration in real time and in real space. So maybe someday we'll have that. But yes, thank you everyone so much for this. And then, yes, we do have a recording of this, but we could talk about how we can make that available if it's okay with everybody. But yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you guys.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure.
We do want to see if the organizers and artists will stay on for a minute after so we can take a picture.
Yeah.
Screenshot. Speaking of surveillance state.
Surveillance.
That's going to be me right now because I want a picture as a souvenir.
I never
Yeah.
see attention.
Thank you everyone for coming.
Yay, thank you. Really appreciated this.
Oh, look at all our beautiful
I
things.
know, it's going down.
Yeah.
Like a
Oh, it's so
countdown.
nice. Oh, so nice to see a bunch of folks I know.
You can see that. Oh, wow.
There were
Just so you,